Hey everybody, another AP2 Lab video about to begin. Today we're doing respiratory stuff. We're going to look at a bunch of respiratory models as well as throw a little histology in there in the end. So this model we're starting out with right here, this is a nose model. So we got nose and head and mouth a little bit all together. So like up here, this is where the forehead is. This is the nose sticking out. There's an upper lip right there just to get you kind of oriented. And air is going to go through the nostril, which we don't really see the hole, but we know there's a nostril under there. In anatomy class, the word for nostril is nares. Don't you love it how we replace good words with new words? So nostril is a nares. And then once the air goes through the nares, it's in the nasal cavity, which we see here where the red arrow is spanning. Now, the nasal cavity on its floor is going to have some bony structures. The bony structures of the nasal cavity make up the hard palate. So where I just drew two purple lines, that's the hard palate, which is the bony floor of the nasal cavity. And that hard palate is made out of two separate bony structures. Anteriorly, we got the palatine process of the maxillary bone, and then posteriorly, we got the horizontal plate of the palatine bone. And of course, this is on the left side. There would be the right side versions of those two bones as well. All right, so that's the floor, the bony floor of our nasal cavity. Now, I also want you to notice that there are projections on the lateral wall of the nasal cavity, 3 projections. And these projections are all called conchae. So these are all called conchae. And the conchae are going to cause the air to swirl around. They also give us some more surface area as well. The guy with the green star on him, this is the superior nasal concha. This is the middle nasal concha with the brown star. And these two conchae are part of the ethmoid bone. So the superior and middle nasal conchae, they belong to the ethmoid bone. This concha down here is the inferior nasal concha. It's a bone by himself, not a part of any other bone. So I see 3 conchae on my left side. Of course, I would have the right side with 3 conchae as well. So, what else do we got going on here? Well, I've got the conchae in here to slow air down. Why do I want to slow air down? I want it to have more time to get processed. I want to filter the air. I want to humidify the air. I want to warm up the air. And much of that processing of air is due to the mucus that lines the surfaces in the nasal cavity. And most of the mucus comes from your nasal sinuses. And we see 2 nasal sinuses. We got the frontal sinus up here in the frontal bone and the sphenoid sinus back here in the sphenoid bone. The sinuses make mucus. The mucus is going to drain into the nasal cavity. There are also sinuses in the ethmoid bone and the maxillary bones. We just don't see those sinuses in this particular model. All right, this is a pretty crowded model, so we're going to do some more stuff on it. So when we leave the nasal cavity, so this is our nasal cavity right here. When we leave the nasal cavity, we're going to be going this way. And where this brownish arrow is, this is the nasopharynx, which is the nose part of the throat. Okay? There are actually a pair of holes connecting the nasal cavity to the nasopharynx. And if I look over here at the skull, it is so much easier to see those holes. I got a red arrow on one. I'm putting an orange arrow on the other. These holes right here are the connecting passageways between the nasal cavity and the nasopharynx. These holes are known as the posterior nasal apertures. An aperture is just a hole. Where is this hole? It's in the back of the nasal cavity. Okay. So once we get into the nasopharynx, there's a bunch of stuff we got to recognize in here. Okay. The floor of the nasopharynx, right here where this orange arrow is, that is the soft palate. Contrast that with the hard palate up here. The inferior part of the soft palate that hangs down is called the uvula. When you swallow, the uvula flips upward, prevents food and drink from going up into this nasopharynx. Now, on the posterior wall of the nasopharynx, we see something right here that we've met before. This is a pharyngeal tonsil right here. Well positioned to catch pathogens as they're inhaled. We also see an opening on the lateral wall of the nasopharynx. That is an opening to an auditory tube. The auditory tube connects the nasopharynx to your middle ear cavity, where you've got those little bones, the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. You got to make sure you balance the pressure in the middle ear with atmospheric pressure and having a passageway for air to enter and exit the middle ear is essential for that pressure balancing. All right, do note that we can see the hard palate in the skull as well. So right here we got the palatine process of the maxillary bone, and then back here we've got the horizontal plate of the palatine bone. So we can see those hard palate structures here as well. Okay, we're almost done with this particular nose model here. But what I want to do now is put the nasal septum on him. So earlier, we had the nasal septum removed to show us the interior of the nasal cavity. And this was actually the left side of the nasal cavity. There's a left and a right side. And they're separated by this structure outlined in red here, which is the nasal septum. Anteriorly, the nasal septum has a piece of cartilage called septocartilage. Unsurprisingly, it's made out of hyaline cartilage. Now, the posterior nasal septum is bony, with the superior part of it being the perpendicular plate of the ethmoid bone, then the inferior part down here being the vomer. And these two guys are the posterior bony part of the nasal septum, whereas the cartilage is that anterior portion. If I go back up to where I can see my skull, do notice that I can see the nasal septum. I did not want to draw a square there. Do notice that I can see the nasal septum right here in between the two apertures. And that bone we're seeing right there, that I just put the arrow on, that bone right there is the vomer. Okay, excellent. I think I'm done with this one. I think so. Yeah. Let's keep on going. Oh yeah, one more little thing. By the way, can you just tell me what that is right there? What's that? I'll give you a hint. It looks kind of like this thing, but it's different. See if you can figure out what that is. And let me know. Let me know. All right, here is the other side of that model. This side just has hard stuff. So we've got like bone and teeth and a little bit of cartilage here. So teeth, lots of bone, a little bit of cartilage. Now what can we see here? We can see the frontal bone with its sinus. We can see the sphenoid bone with its sinus. We can see the three nasal conchae with the superior and middle ones belonging to the ethmoid bone. And then the bottom one here, the inferior nasal concha, being a bone unto itself. We can also see the bony hard palate with the anterior palatine process of the maxillary bone, and then the posterior horizontal plate of the palatine bone. So really good nose model here. I like it a lot. Here we have a sagittal head model, and I can see just a ton of stuff that I saw already. I can see my frontal sinus, all three of my conchae. I can see my sphenoid sinus. The nares is right there. This little space where there's hair and boogers sometimes. That is called the vestibule. I can see my hard palate. Anteriorly, the palatine process, the maxillary bone. Posteriorly, the horizontal plate of the palatine bone. And I got my soft palate with its hanging down uvula. So structures I've met before. And now I can see some more familiar structures, plus also some new stuff. If I am adjacent to my soft palate, so in between the orange lines here, that is going to be my nasopharynx. So that is my nasopharynx. So where this orange line is right here, and I'm going to put a blue, like, kind of oval right there. That is where the nasal cavity connects with the nasopharynx. So where I've drawn that blue oval right there, that is where I'd find my posterior nasal aperture. And then in my nasopharynx, on the posterior wall of it, I've got the pharyngeal tonsil. On the lateral wall of the nasopharynx, where the 3 is, right here, this is the opening to my auditory tube, which, remember, is going to lead to the middle ear. Okay, so if we find that soft palate and we find that uvula, here's the uvula right here. So here's the bottom tip of the uvula, okay? The bottom tip of the uvula. Put a line right there. This sticky up thing is part of our larynx. This number 6 here is called the epiglottis. And if I'm between the epiglottis and the uvula, this region here is called the oropharynx. So we had the nasopharynx, that was the throat area behind the nose. The oropharynx is the throat area behind the mouth. And associated structures there include the the palatine tonsil. There's the palatine tonsil right there on that lateral wall. And then also on the tongue, the yellowish guy here with the number 8 on him, that is the lingual tonsil. So again, back to this epiglottis here. This epiglottis is part of the larynx. When you swallow, this guy folds downward, and so the only way food and drink can go is down the esophagus back here. Now, if I am adjacent to the upright larynx, so where the number 11 is here, kind of like this space right here, this is the final part of the throat. This is called the laryngopharynx. So we had nasopharynx up here, oropharynx right here, and laryngopharynx down here. Perfection. Okay, what else do we see here? I got some other respiratory and laryngeal structures. So for example, this is a respiratory laryngeal cartilage right here. This guy is called the cricoid cartilage, number 10. I also see my hyoid bone, number 9 here as well. Okay. Same basic model, just we've exposed more of the larynx. So again, we did a bunch of stuff up here in the nasal cavity. We had our nasopharynx right here. Then we had our oropharynx, and we did some tonsils there. Number 2 is on the epiglottis. So this is the epiglottis. It's just been cut. And if we're next to the epiglottis, like right in between these 2 lines here, this would be the laryngopharynx. And now let's focus on some laryngeal structures. We got the epiglottis here. Remember, this tip is going to fold down like this and cover up the air passage, so food and drink has got to go back here down the esophagus. But we've got some other laryngeal structures here. All right, we got the epiglottis, we got the neighboring hyoid bone. We also see the biggest cartilage of the larynx. That's number 3 here. It is called the thyroid cartilage. We'll see him better in a future model. We also see the cricoid cartilage on both the anterior and posterior surfaces, because the cricoid cartilage is a ring. And then within my larynx, on the lateral wall here, I see 2 folds. The lower fold is called the vocal fold. That is what I'm using to make sounds. That is for speech. The fold above it is called the vestibular fold. It is going to protect my vocal fold. Sometimes the vocal fold, the lower one, number 4, is called the true vocal cord. And number 5, the vestibular fold, is called the false vocal cord. So we got a lot of good laryngeal structures in here as well. And here I got another nose model. Don't know kind of like why I've sequenced it like this, but here's another nose model. Check out all these things, go over it. Another nose model, the other side of the nose model, more things that we can see. And another nose model, maybe the ugliest, oldest one of them all, but still got some good stuff. So check that guy out too. And there's the other side of him. And now I'm going to keep moving my way down the respiratory tract. So in the neck, we see the hyoid bone right there. Below it, we see the thyroid cartilage, the biggest cartilage of the larynx. There's the thyroid gland, which you remember from lab number 1. There's the trachea coming down as well. And now we see the 2 lungs in that thoracic cavity, the heart and the mediastinum between them. As I look at the 2 lungs, I'm going to notice that my right lung has 1, 2, 3 lobes to it. So the right lung has a superior lobe, then a middle lobe with the number 5, and then an inferior lobe with the number 6. So there are fissures. I'm going to draw a blue line on the fissure between the superior and middle lobe. That is called the horizontal fissure because it's, more horizontal than the other ones. This guy, which is less horizontal, more at an angle, this fissure is called the oblique fissure because of its angular nature, and it separates my middle and my inferior lobes of my right lung. There's my superior lobe and my right lung up there. On the left-hand side, we just have a superior and an inferior lobe with a single oblique fissure between them. Do notice that there is an indentation in the left lung here because of the heart, and that indentation is called the cardiac notch. Also notice that down here, all this muscle here, all this muscle here, this muscle right here, that's all diaphragm. That is all the diaphragm. I do see the esophagus like poking through the diaphragm right there. Check that out. Okay, good stuff. Let's take this model apart a little bit, see what's inside. So we got that trachea coming down. The trachea is going to branch right here, and I get a main bronchus labeled on the left here. Of course, there is a main bronchus on the right as well. The main bronchus is going to branch into lobar bronchi. So I've got a superior lobar bronchus with the number 3, and there's an inferior lobar bronchus right there. So 2 lobar bronchi on the left because there's only 2 lobes, right? Superior, inferior lobe. On the right-hand side, I'm going to have a superior lobar bronchus, an inferior one, and a middle one, okay? Because I got 3 lobes here. I can see my 3 lobes ever so nicely right there. Now, lobar bronchi then branch to give us what are called segmental bronchi, and I see some segmental bronchi here as well. I also look at my diaphragm. Sometimes people get confused and they think the diaphragm is only like this line right here, not realizing it is dome shaped. So like all this muscle that you're seeing in here, all this muscle here is the diaphragm. So if I put a tag down here, don't get confused, that's the diaphragm. All right. Taking a chunk of the lung out, we can see the blood vessels, and of course, remember, they're backwards. So we got the pulmonary artery as the blue guy here, the pulmonary vein as the red guy here, and I see a segmental bronchus, the light blue. I see the diaphragm. I see the lungs' mediastinal surface right there as well. All right, backing up to the trachea. Not to the trachea. Oh my gosh. Backing up to the larynx. One of these days I'm going to have like the perfect video where I don't misspeak at all. Probably not. That's okay. All right, check out this larynx. There's nothing really new here. There's the hyoid bone up top. This big cartilage is the thyroid cartilage. I do want you to notice the protrusion of the thyroid cartilage. It was present in the other models. I just didn't make a point of emphasis about it. And the protruding sticky out part, where the 3 is, that is called the laryngeal prominence. So we often call that the Adam's apple, right? We're not going to say that anymore, but that is the laryngeal prominence. Below the thyroid cartilage, we got the thyroid gland with the number 4 on it right there. Kind of hard to see the cricoid cartilage because of the thyroid gland and the musculature here. I can see the trachea nicely in the bottom though. All right, let's kind of open this larynx model up. No, let's flip him around first. If I flip him around, I see the hyoid bone in the back. Notice the hyoid bone is not a ring. It doesn't encircle the whole thing. I see the thyroid cartilage in the back as well, but it doesn't connect in the back. The word thyroid means shield-shaped, and the word thyroid describes the cartilage, and then the gland is named after the cartilage. I do see the cricoid cartilage in the back. The cricoid cartilage does encircle the larynx. The word cricoid refers to a kind of ring. And I got my thyroid gland over here as well. Got my epiglottis also. All the cartilage is going to be protective. It also keeps the airway patent, which is another way of saying it keeps the airway open. I do see my trachea down here. One really important thing to notice about the trachea here is that there is no posterior cartilage. The light blue, the cartilage, is on the lateral sides of the trachea and is anterior, but it's not in the back. This is going to make the trachea more flexible in the back, which means when you swallow a big mouthful of food, your esophagus can expand and actually push into the trachea a little bit, which is kind of neat. Okay, now let's cut this thing open. So here we've sliced open the hyoid bone. We can see its interior. We see the sliced thyroid cartilage. This is where the laryngeal prominence would be. We see the epiglottis right here sticking up. We see a lot of the musculature of the larynx. We see the thyroid gland cut down here. That's the isthmus of the thyroid gland down there. We see the cricoid cartilage, and we see the trachea, and its cartilage right there as well. If we cut this guy further, again, we can see that hyoid bone, that thyroid cartilage, that thyroid gland, that cricoid cartilage, got the trachea down here. I can also see my 2 folds. The lower fold here is the vocal fold, also known as the true vocal cord. The upper one is the vestibular fold, also known as the false vocal cord. Okay, If I take a superior view of my intact larynx model, there is the hyoid bone, here's the epiglottis, here's the thyroid cartilage, and now what I can see in this view, and this is why I'm showing you this view, is this space between the vocal folds on the left and the vocal folds on the right, and that space there is called the glottis. And now you can figure out why the epiglottis gets its name. The epiglottis is going to cover up the glottis. Okay, here is another larynx model. See if you can label everything on it. And here's the interior. See if you can label all the important things on it as well. Now here is a sheep lung. This is a real freeze-dried sheep lung. People always say, no, it's fake. It's made of styrofoam. No, it's not. It's a real freeze-dried sheep lung. It's not like a handcrafted styrofoam model. Anyway, it's got a trachea, and I got my right lung where the 2 and the 3 are, and my left lung here. The sheep is a little bit weird. The sheep has a cranial lobe on the right here, as well as a caudal lobe. Cranial means towards the head. Caudal means towards the tail. So cranial and caudal lobes here. Cranial and caudal lobes on the left as well. Now this surface of the lung that I've outlined in red, that's called the costal surface because, of course, the ribs would be pressing right there. Okay, if we look at the front, we can still see the trachea. I got my right lung over here where 2 through 5 are, and my left lung over here where 6 and 7 are. Let's do the left lung. It's a little bit easier. There's a cranial lobe and a caudal lobe. Then on the right, I've got my cranial lobe up here. And then I'm also going to have a middle lobe, got my caudal lobe, and I got an accessory lobe as well. So my right lung a little bit more involved in the sheep. I also see this area I've outlined in red. That's where the heartwood sits. There's like a dent and a dent, and the dented area is called the cardiac impression. Okay, let's take one more view of my sheep lung. Did I mean one? No, I meant two. Two more views. This is that posterior view. The diaphragm would be sitting where this red dashed line is. I still see a lot of my lobes, which I've labeled here for you. Obviously, I'm not just going to show you this picture. I'm going to show you an intact sheep lung. But again, we can see the cranial, the middle, the caudal, the accessory lobe right there, cranial caudal right there. And most interestingly, there's a hole right here. That hole right here is for the inferior vena cava to sneak through to get to the heart. Okay, finally, we got this last view of the sheep lung here. There's the trach, and I got my right and my left with my cranial and caudal lobes on both sides. But now I see this beautiful dorsal groove right here. That's where I'm going to find my thoracic aorta, my azygos vein, my esophagus, and other things as well. All right, so that is the sheep lung. Yes. This model is of a pulmonary lobule. So we talked about lobes earlier. The lobes of the lung are made of smaller structures called lobules. And I've got blood vessels here plus respiratory structures. This number 1 up here is a small bronchus. He's still got some cartilage to help give him support. He's next to a branch of the pulmonary vein. I got a neighboring pulmonary artery branch as well. This little guy sticking out right here is what's called a terminal bronchiole. A terminal bronchiole is the last airway structure. So terminal meaning last, right? Without the little spherical guys here. The little spherical guys here are alveoli. Those are gas exchange structures. So all these little balls, all these little spheres here are alveoli. They are where we exchange gas. Notice that in much of the model, the alveoli are covered by capillaries because gas exchanges, of course, between the air in the alveoli and the blood in these capillaries. They're also trying to show you that alveoli are covered in elastic fibers as well. That's going to help with our exhalation, like our breathing out. Because when we breathe in, we stretch the alveoli, and when we stretch these elastic fibers, they want to recoil and snap back, which helps them get back to their original shape, which helps expel air. I also see a cluster of alveoli down here. Such a cluster is known as an alveolar sac. And then finally, this is the outer membrane of the lung itself. This is called the visceral pleura. Okay, if we flip this guy around, I've got some more stuff. I do see little bronchus here. Pulmonary vein branch is the red guy. Pulmonary artery branch is the blue guy. Remember, they're switched. There's my terminal bronchiole right there. I got a bunch of alveoli in a row here, and all the alveoli in a row create an alveolar duct. And of course, we see individual alveoli over here, cobwebbed with pulmonary capillaries. And then this little layer of epithelium out here is my visceral pleura. So that is it for this beautiful model right here. And with that, it is time for histology. And histology is where we're going to finish out the day. We're going to look at two organs, the trachea and the lung. This is the trachea. Here's the lumen up here. This is its pseudostratified columnar epithelium with goblet cells. There's a goblet cell right there. Of course, goblet cells make mucus. There are cilia right here, whose job is to sweep that mucus superiorly. Underneath this epithelium, where the blue region is, this is going to be the submucosa. Got a lot of connective tissue in here, plus like a lot of lumens of seromucus glands, which are going to make more mucus to add to the lumen to help modify the air. See a nice blood vessel. Look at that little guy right there. Little guy right there, little arteriole right there. Okay, beneath the submucosa, we've got the layer of cartilage. This is the tracheal cartilage here. This is, of course, hyaline cartilage. It's there to strengthen the trachea and to keep it open, to prevent it from collapsing. Of course, think back to AP1. We got the matrix. We got the chondrocytes in their lacunae. All that good stuff from last semester. Then finally, the outermost layer of the trachea here is the adventitia, connective tissue layer that is going to bind the trachea to nearby structures such as the esophagus. All right, I want to zoom in now. Let's zoom in on that epithelium. This is the pseudostratified columnar, pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium with goblet cells. Look at those cilia right there. The goblet cells make the mucus, the cilia sweep the mucus. It is a wonderful situation. So that's our epithelium of our trachea. Here's another one. See if you can find everything in here. Also a good picture. And now this is the lung. So in my lung, notice that I see simple squamous epithelia, the thinness of which is so good for gas exchange. And a C-shaped structure like this is an example of an alveolus, which are the little sites of gas exchange. Got a blood vessel over here as well. Of course, you need blood vessels for gas exchange. All right, I got another lung for you to look at. Find me some simple squamous epithelium. Find me some alveoli in this one. Come talk to me if you're stuck on this or on anything. All right. Good job, good job. If you made it all the way to the end, you are amongst the few who've done so. So I'll see you next time. We got another respiratory lab on tap to do a video for. That'll be the next one. And I'll see you then. Bye-bye.